picture yourself sitting in a standard Tuesday morning check-in meeting. You know the kind, right?
Oh, yeah. Stale coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing.
Exactly. You've got the slide deck projected up on the screen. Someone is just droning on about, like, Q3 deliverables. And there's this comfortable, unspoken agreement in the room about exactly what is happening.
Right. Everyone generally agrees on the basic parameters of reality in that room.
Yeah. You are all speaking the exact same silent language of corporate expectations. But what if the person sitting directly across from you is, quite literally, operating in a completely different dimension?
I mean, that's a terrifying thought for some managers.
It is. What if, while you're just sitting there nodding at a bulleted list, their brain has already simulated like 1,000 branching high-speed possibilities for the entire quarter, and the sheer velocity of their own internal processing is physically suffocating them?
Well, it completely shatters that illusion of a shared reality, doesn't it? We tend to assume that just because we are all sitting in the same room under those same lights, we're experiencing the exact same event. But for someone who is profoundly neurodivergent, the rules of engagement that everyone else just takes for granted, they simply don't apply.
Right.
And the most dangerous part of that is that the expectation to follow those standard rules remains entirely unchanged, despite that massive cognitive disconnect.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are tailoring our analysis specifically for you, the listener, to essentially take you directly across that cognitive disconnect.
And we have an incredibly fascinating set of source materials to explore for this.
We really do. We're going to be dissecting this highly personal, deeply introspective essay. Or, honestly, maybe it's better described as a set of literal survival notes.
Yeah, survival notes feels much more accurate based on the tone.
Right. The document is titled My Instruction Manual, and it carries the subtitle Growth Mindset. It's actually slated for publication coming up in May of 2026.
And the background of the author here is what makes this document an absolute goldmine of insight. They have been diagnosed with both ADHD and ASD. So, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and autism spectrum disorder.
But I want to be very clear up front for you listening. They are not writing a clinical, detached medical paper here.
No, not at all.
This is a raw, real-time, lived account of what it actually means to possess this brilliant, hyper-accelerated mind inside a corporate structure that actively demands conformity.
Right, and to build out this framework, the author leans heavily on a 2023 book by Jeanne Siaud-Facchin. It's titled Adult Gifted. Why is it so hard to live despite high intelligence?
Such a good title.
It really is. And our author pulls passages from this book, essentially using it as a mirror, to finally understand and articulate their own chaotic experience.
Which perfectly leads us to our core mission for you today. We aren't going to waste your time just listing off textbook definitions of neurodiversity or like debating what giftedness theoretically looks like on a standardized IQ test.
Exactly. The core value of this deep dive is completely functional.
Yeah.
We are stepping directly inside the lived experience of someone trying to navigate a rigid, unyielding corporate world with a brain that fundamentally refuses to be standardized.
And we are going to break down their brilliant, self-authored instruction manual for survival. Our goal is to help you understand the immense and often really painful gap between having high intelligence and actually being able to interface with a society that was never built to accommodate it.
Because it's one thing to talk about talent in the abstract, right? I mean, everyone loves the idea of hiring a genius.
Oh, absolutely. It looks great on a brochure.
Right. But the reality of a genuinely brilliant mind feeling completely alienated and frankly paralyzed in a mundane office environment is entirely different.
So before we can even begin to understand how this author interacts with their workplace or how their manual functions, we have to establish what it physically and mentally feels like inside their head every single day. We have to look under the hood of the machinery.
And man, the machinery is intense.
It really is.
The author highlights a specific story from that Adult Gifted book that perfectly sets the stage for this internal experience. It's an account of a young woman who has just reached her absolute breaking point.
Yeah, this part was rough to read.
She is quoted as begging, and there's this layer of dark humor to it, but it's clearly driven by absolute desperation. She said, "Please, cut off a part of my brain."
It's such a visceral plea. I mean, you don't ask for a literal lobotomy unless the internal noise is just utterly unbearable.
Exactly. The source details her total exhaustion. She describes her brain as being constantly in this high-speed rotation.
Right.
It's a nonstop maximum output machine that fundamentally lacks an off switch. She explains that she can't even achieve basic rest. She can't sleep because the gears in her head are just constantly, endlessly grinding through data and thoughts and stimuli.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because our author reads that exact quote from the young woman and basically says, yes, that is exactly my daily reality.
Yeah, immediate recognition.
But then they take it a step further and build their own profound analogy to explain the actual mechanics of this exhaustion. They describe their own mind as having the engine of a Ferrari, but the brakes of a light motor vehicle.
Which is such a brilliant way to phrase it.
It really is. Essentially, think of a tiny, low-power commuter car.
Right. In a lot of international markets, they call them key cars.
Okay, yeah.
These are vehicles explicitly designed for light, slow city driving. They might max out at like 40 miles an hour. So you have a braking system tasked with stopping a grocery getter, but it's been installed on a machine built for a Formula One racetrack.
Let's really put ourselves in the driver's seat of that specific car for a minute, because the implications are terrifying if you think about it.
Go for it.
Imagine you have this roaring, aggressive V8 power under the hood. You tap the gas pedal even a fraction of an inch, and you are instantly catapulted to 200 miles an hour.
Just massive, instant torque.
Right. The raw processing power, the acceleration, the capability, it is phenomenal. But the environment you are forced to drive in isn't a straight, wide-open, empty track.
Not at all. It's the corporate world.
Exactly. You are driving down a winding, crowded, unpredictable city street. You have to corner safely. You have to yield at crosswalks for pedestrians. You have to navigate agonizing stop-and-go traffic.
Now, imagine this specific moment you encounter one of those everyday obstacles.
Okay.
You see a stop sign. You press the brake pedal. And there is almost zero resistance.
Oh, man.
The braking system simply lacks the physical capacity, the friction, the sheer mechanical strength to decelerate the massive momentum of that engine.
Ooh, the panic would be overwhelming. You'd be living in a state of constant, unrelenting fear of a catastrophic crash, simply because you physically cannot decelerate when the environment demands it.
Exactly. You possess all this incredible power, but you have absolutely no control over how it interfaces with the world around you.
You're just gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, hoping you don't destroy your own career or alienate everyone around you. That is the internal baseline. That is the reality this author wakes up to before they even pour their morning coffee.
What's fascinating here is the author's profound, almost stoic realization about this specific neurological setup.
Yeah, they don't hold back.
They aren't looking for sympathy, right? And they aren't searching for a medical miracle. They state plainly that this condition cannot be cured.
Right.
There is no surgeon or therapist who can go in and install upgraded brakes in their neurological circuitry. They acknowledge that they must coexist with this Ferrari engine and these inadequate brakes until the day they die.
That sounds like a remarkably heavy burden to accept, to just surrender to the idea that the brakes will never work.
It is heavy, yeah. But look at the strategic pivot it allows them to make.
Okay.
It's incredibly liberating in a practical sense. Because once you fully accept it, you kind of fix it.
Oh, that makes sense.
The only logical step is to figure out how to utilize it. You stop trying to force the Ferrari to drive to the grocery store and then complaining that the suspension is too stiff and it's impossible to parallel park.
Right. You stop fighting the fundamental nature of your own neurobiology, and you start actively looking for the racetrack.
Precisely.
You design a life around the engine's unique capabilities rather than punishing it for its lack of commuter car features. I love that framework. But part of having that engine means dealing with what the source describes as a constant, unstoppable, predictive loop.
Yes, the predictive loop is huge.
The author talks about existing in a permanent state of always thinking. And we need to clarify this for the listener. This isn't just standard daydreaming.
No.
They aren't staring out the window thinking about what to have for lunch. It is a hypervigilant, involuntary process of predicting what will happen after every single action, conversation, or event.
Yeah, the mechanism behind this is what psychologists sometimes refer to as bottom-up processing, combined with a lack of latent inhibition.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
Well, a neurotypical brain filters out irrelevant information automatically. It essentially says, I don't need to notice the hum of the air conditioner, and I don't need to analyze why my coworker just sighed.
Right, it just throws that data away.
Exactly. But the Ferrari brain takes in absolutely everything and assigns equal weight to it. It acts like an algorithmic supercomputer running endless, exhaustive simulations.
Oh, wow.
So it's like if I say X to the manager, they might say Y, which means Z could happen at next week's review. If I move this stack of papers here, the shadow falls there, which might subconsciously distract the person sitting across from me, which might alter their mood, which might ruin the negotiation.
It is a cascading fractal tree of probabilities generated for every minute detail of their existence.
That's exactly it.
It makes my head spin just hearing you describe it. I mean, the sheer cognitive load that requires is astronomical. Most of us rely on mental shortcuts. We walk into a room, grab a coffee, and sit down.
All right, we filter out 99% of the incoming data because we don't need it to survive a 10 a.m. status meeting.
Right. We have cognitive breaks. But this author doesn't have that filter, and they can't stop the simulation from running its full course every single time.
Which perfectly explains the exhaustion the young woman in the book described earlier.
Yeah.
The author's energy reserves are completely drained before they even interact with a single human being.
Mm.
They aren't burning out from the actual work. They are burning out from the invisible labor of processing the infinite variables of their environment.
Okay, so we have established this unstoppable hyper-processing Ferrari engine. We understand the internal velocity. Now we have to look at the first major external barrier.
The real world.
Exactly. What happens when this incredible, terrifying machine attempts to merge into the slow, standardized, highly regulated traffic of the corporate hiring process?
The transition from internal experience to external reality is where the friction truly begins. We are entering the communication chasm.
And nothing represents that chasm better than the job hunt. Look, looking for a job is a grind for anyone. It's universally disliked.
Definitely.
But the data the author presents regarding their own job hunting funnel is staggering. They've tracked this pattern meticulously. Every time they need to change jobs, they have to apply to over 100 companies.
Which is already a lot of work.
Huge amount of work.
Yeah.
Out of that massive pool, they might secure interviews at roughly 30. And here is where it gets brutal.
Yeah.
Out of those 30 interviews, they face complete across-the-board rejection over and over until finally landing just one single offer, a 100 to 30 to 1 funnel.
That ratio is punishing. And keep in mind, this is someone whose brain is already exhausting them with those predictive simulations we just discussed.
Right. Going into one interview is exhausting, let alone 30.
Going through 29 rejections requires an immense amount of resilience. But the reason for this failure rate is what's truly revealing here.
Why does it happen?
The author pulls a crucial insight from the Adult Gifted book to explain this funnel. The book argues that gifted or neurodivergent individuals don't just think faster. They have a fundamentally different architecture of thought compared to standard corporate recruiters.
They are essentially operating on two completely different operating systems, like Mac versus PC, but with infinitely more complexity.
Precisely. The book notes that because of this divergent thought process, these individuals consistently misunderstand the questions being asked in an interview setting.
Okay.
And because the premise of the question is misunderstood, the answer they provide inherently distorts the image they present to the recruiter.
Interesting.
The recruiter sees a distorted, unpredictable candidate, which inevitably leads to a rejection. The candidate fails to get placed, not because they lack the skills, but because of a catastrophic translation error.
I have to pause and push back on this corporate logic, though.
Yeah.
If you look at almost any job posting today, companies are screaming from the rooftops that they want out-of-the-box thinkers. They want innovative disruptors. They want unconventional problem solvers.
That's the buzzword bingo. Yeah.
Right. So if they want that so desperately, why on earth does this specific type of highly analytical, literal, out-of-the-box thinker fail 29 out of 30 interviews? It seems completely contradictory.
It is the grand hypocrisy of the modern corporate ecosystem.
Seriously.
Companies claim they want out-of-the-box thinking because it sounds great on a company's About Us page.
Yeah.
But practically speaking, what standard management actually desires is in-the-box thinking that has been painted a slightly different, maybe more exciting color.
Wow. Yeah.
They want linear progression that is marginally faster than the competitors. They do not want someone who looks at the box, deconstructs it into a hyperdimensional shape, and then suggests the box was the wrong container to begin with.
Right. The recruiter's prompt is essentially, be innovative, but please do it strictly within the exact predictable parameters we have already anticipated.
Exactly. If we analyze the mechanics of a standard job interview based on the source's findings, it becomes clear that interviews are not actually tests of skill.
What are they then?
They are tests of implied social scripts. They rely heavily on standardized, expected answers.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, when a recruiter asks a question like, what is your biggest weakness? They absolutely do not want a profound, medically accurate breakdown of your neurological processing flaws.
Oh, definitely not.
They are looking for a socially acceptable, pre-packaged answer. They want you to say, I just care too much about the details, or I work too hard.
But the Ferrari brain doesn't have a catalog of prepackaged, socially agreeable scripts.
No, it doesn't. When the author's brain hears a question, it doesn't take the paved road to the standard answer. It goes down a highly complex, deeply analytical, completely unexpected path.
Because it's taking the question literally.
Yes. The recruiter asks a seemingly simple question. The author's predictive loop kicks in, evaluating 1,000 variables regarding the true nature of weaknesses in a corporate paradigm. And they deliver an answer that is likely technically brilliant, totally honest, but socially jarring.
It's like the recruiter is standing at a stop sign, expecting a polite little commuter car to pull up, roll the window down, and hand them a resume.
Right.
Instead, a Ferrari drifts around the corner at 90 miles an hour, doing donuts in the intersection, and hands them a blueprint for a hovercraft.
That's a perfect image.
Yeah.
And the recruiter doesn't interpret that as innovative. They interpret it as a threat to the established order.
Yeah, they get scared.
They see it as wrong or inappropriate or, as the source text states, a distorted image. Recruiters are trained to look for pattern matches. Does this person match the culture? Do they match the previous person who held this role?
And the neurodivergent brain is a pattern breaker.
By its very definition, yes. Therefore, the system's immune response triggers, and it rejects them 29 times out of 30.
It is a brutal gauntlet. And yet, somehow, through sheer attrition, they survive the funnel, they get that one offer, they finally make it inside the building.
The chosen one.
Right. But as the author's manual makes devastatingly clear, surviving the interview is merely step one. The real friction starts when this individual is actually sitting in the office trying to communicate in routine, everyday meetings.
The transition from the interview to the conference room introduces us to what the author's experiences paint as an absolute minefield of unwritten rules.
Minefield is the perfect word, because the rules of the meeting room are just as unwritten, just as rigid, and just as heavily reliant on social scripts as the job interview.
Oh, absolutely.
The source highlights an incredibly common workplace trap that perfectly illustrates this. We have all experienced this. The meeting leader wraps up their presentation, looks around the table, and says, "Please ask questions or comment anytime."
It is the classic illusion of open communication.
Yes, it's a corporate platitude. It is explicitly designed to signal a democratic, open-door environment, but it has invisible, strictly enforced boundaries.
The implicit rule is ask questions, provided they are minor, clarifying questions that validate the premise of my presentation.
Exactly. But our author, who is operating with a brain that processes information literally and structurally, takes that invitation completely at face value.
Which is dangerous.
Very. They have spent the last 20 minutes analyzing the presentation. Their Ferrari brain has spotted a massive structural flaw in the Q3 strategy, so they speak up and ask their question. And what happens? The trap snaps shut.
Instantly.
They are immediately shut down. The response from the leader is almost universally, "Your topic is off track. Can we do this later?"
That kind of dismissal is incredibly disorienting. The author notes that regardless of the company, the meeting, or the topic, they are constantly left with the lingering impression that they are out of sync.
Like they missed a memo everyone else got.
Yeah. They are continually made to feel that they are the one deviating from the norm. It creates a pervasive, exhausting feeling of being fundamentally incorrect in how they perceive and interact with the professional world.
And this specific dynamic brings up a deeply vulnerable, very self-aware part of the source material. The author is actively wrestling with their own dual diagnosis here.
Right, the ADHD and ASD.
Yes, and they struggle internally to parse out which condition is driving these specific, painful interactions and meetings. However, they note that they lean heavily toward ASD when it comes to understanding this particular sensitivity to criticism and misunderstanding.
They are acting as their own neurologist, trying to locate the exact source of the friction.
It's fascinating.
To explain this feeling, they pull another quote from the Adult Gifted book that perfectly captures the resulting paranoia. The quote states that individuals with these brain types are constantly anxious that what is being said to them is a veiled attack.
A veiled attack, wow.
Yeah, they feel a constant vigilance, assuming that people are always trying to find their arrow point, which is a metaphor for their absolute weaknesses or hidden vulnerabilities.
Wait, I need to look closer at that because that feels like a chicken and egg scenario to me.
How so?
Well, how much of that paranoia is an inherent biological trait of the ASD or ADHD diagnosis, and how much of it is simply a conditioned logical response to a hostile environment?
Ah, I see what you mean.
If you spend your entire professional life being told that your natural way of thinking is off track or inappropriate, wouldn't anyone become deeply paranoid? How does that repeated invalidation fundamentally reshape a person's reality in the workplace?
This raises an incredibly important question, and it speaks to a concept often referred to as rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD,
RSC, okay.
highly prevalent in neurodivergent communities.
Yeah.
And it's the context that matters here. If every single time you speak up in a meeting, you are swatted down and told you are deviating, your brain is going to adapt to protect you. You are going to develop a hypersensitivity to any form of feedback. You start viewing even simple, neutral questions from colleagues as aggressive attacks.
Sure.
You are constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for someone to locate your arrow point and exploit it.
Because that's what's happened before.
Because historically, in 29 out of 30 interviews and in countless meetings, that is exactly what the environment has done to you. The paranoia isn't an irrational symptom of a broken brain. It's a highly logical, learned survival mechanism in a world that constantly, systematically invalidates your perspective.
That makes perfect sense. It's pure self-preservation. And the source doesn't just leave this as an abstract psychological concept either.
No, they give a brutal example.
They provide a highly specific, excruciating anecdote that illustrates exactly how this invalidation plays out in real time. They ask the reader a rhetorical question directly addressing anyone who has worked in an office. They say, "Are there high-status people in your regular meetings who interrupt others?"
And we all know the answer is yes.
Oh, universally yes. And they note, with this hint of resignation, that in their current company, these people absolutely exist.
This introduces the hierarchy of interruption. It is the unwritten, universally understood rule that status dictates who is allowed to break the flow of conversation and whose ideas are allowed to take up space.
Right. So let's set the scene based on the author's notes. The author is speaking, they are presenting their information, and given what we know about their brain, they are likely delivering a complex, highly nuanced analysis that their Ferrari engine has generated.
Probably a very dense, data-rich point.
Exactly. And suddenly, this high-status person interrupts them right in the middle of their flow. They completely dismiss the author, telling them that their entire point is off track.
Which is bad enough.
But the cruelty doesn't stop with the dismissal. After shutting down the premise, this high-status individual looks at the author and condescendingly asks, "Did you even understand what you just said?"
It is a breathtaking level of condescension.
It made me angry just reading it.
I mean, it goes far beyond simply disagreeing with a business strategy. It is a public, humiliating invalidation of the author's intellect, their coherence, and their basic comprehension of reality.
Let's really try to translate what that moment feels like for the author. Remember the internal state we established earlier. You have spent an immense amount of energy that is already severely depleted by your brain's constant, inescapable predictive loops just to prepare for this standard check-in.
We're already running on fumes.
Right. You have processed the data from 100 different angles. You are bringing your absolute best high-speed, multidimensional analysis to this table to try and help the company. You are offering them the Ferrari's unique perspective.
And they don't want it.
Not only is your offering swatted away like a buzzing nuisance, but you are spoken to as if you are a confused, babbling child.
And the author's description of their internal reaction to this public humiliation is documented with chilling clarity. They don't yell, they don't argue back, their mind goes completely blank.
It's a total freeze response. After dismantling them, the high-status person casually waves a hand and says, "Okay, continue the rest," like nothing even happened.
The whiplash of that is insane.
And the author writes that in that moment, they think, what is the point? They feel there is absolutely no reason to continue speaking. All the contextual scaffolding they built, all the nuance they were trying to explain, has just been deemed totally worthless by the hierarchy of the room.
Right.
The system has officially notified them that their contribution is invalid. So the engine just stalls out. The connection is severed. It is a complete and total system shutdown.
If we connect this specific meeting room trauma to the bigger picture of the author's life, we start to see the emergence of a profound psychological coping mechanism.
Which is what?
Well, when the reality of interacting with neurotypical environments is that consistently painful and invalidating, the brain finds a way to survive. And it does that by physically remaining in the room while mentally leaving the building.
This brings us to section 4 of our deep dive, which explores a state of being the author lives in almost constantly. We can call it the dissociative observer, because you can't endure that level of friction every day without blowing a fuse. The brain has to protect itself.
The source material provides incredibly powerful, almost haunting quotes about this feeling of disconnection. The author again turns to the adult gifted book, which describes a state of never feeling completely connected to the present moment.
Right.
The individual is physically present, they're looking at someone, their mouth is moving, they are talking, but simultaneously, their consciousness is floated above the scene.
Like an out-of-body experience.
Sort of. They are watching themselves talk from the outside. They are analyzing the flow of the conversation while they are participating in it, treating their own life as a subject of detached study.
It's depersonalization. It's like your life is a live stream, and you are trapped being both a performer on camera faking your way through the script and the detached person sitting in the chat room critiquing the performance.
That's a great way to put it.
And the most heartbreaking part of the source material is the author's confession that they feel this everywhere. It isn't just in toxic meetings with high-status bullies. It is a universal state of being.
Everywhere they go.
They feel it at company drinking parties. They feel it in casual check-ins. They have felt it at every single company they've ever worked for.
They explicitly mention that they only attend those company drinking parties maybe once every few years because of this exact phenomenon.
I don't blame them.
Think about the purpose of those events. For neurotypical employees, social rituals like after-work drinks are supposed to build cohesion. They are meant to be a space to relax and lower your guard.
Yeah, grab a beer, complain about the boss.
Exactly. But for the author, it is just another exhausting arena of disconnected performance. It requires them to manually process social cues that others process automatically, pushing them further into that dissociative observing state.
I can't even fathom how profoundly lonely that must be. To be surrounded by your colleagues, to be physically present in a crowded bar but feeling completely, utterly untethered from the human beings laughing and talking right next to you.
Yeah.
You are essentially a ghost haunting your own professional life.
The author uses a specific, very relatable analogy from the adult gifted book to describe this. They say it feels exactly like watching a movie where you aren't a participant.
Right.
You are sitting in the dark theater watching a film about a corporate employee going through their day, and you are just a spectator to your own existence.
But the tragedy of it is that it's not just a flat line of protective numbness. There is a terrifying oscillation to this state.
The ups and downs.
Yes, because the quote they use goes on to contrast that numbness with sudden, fleeting, explosive moments of contacting the world. And when those moments happen, when the dissociation breaks and a connection finally sparks, it results in intense euphoria.
It's a rush.
The author describes feeling a sense of omnipotence. Suddenly, they feel like they can do anything, solve any problem, connect with anyone.
But that euphoria is a neurological trap.
Why?
It is entirely unsustainable. Because almost immediately, inevitably, that high crashes into a wall of frustration. They realize they can't sustain the connection, or the rigid environment won't allow them to achieve more than that brief, fleeting moment permitted. The dopamine crashes, and they are back in the theater watching the movie.
Wait, I see a pattern here. If we connect this back to our very first analogy, the psychological cycle of dissociation and euphoria perfectly mirrors the mechanics of the Ferrari engine we discussed.
Oh, absolutely.
The extreme isolation, the depersonalization, the feeling of watching the movie that is the massive engine idling painfully in bumper-to-bumper traffic. It's suffocating. It's overheating.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, a gap in the traffic opens up. A moment of genuine connection occurs, or a complex problem arises that they are perfectly uniquely suited to solve. The pedal hits the floor, the engine finally gets to redline. Euphoria, omnipotence, they are flying.
Exactly. The analogy holds up perfectly. Because the straightaway in a corporate environment is only ever 100 yards long.
And then the traffic closes back in.
Always.
Yeah.
The meeting ends, the rigid rules reassert themselves, and those inadequate brakes fail. The crash of frustration is immediate and severe. There is no cruising speed for this brain. There's no middle ground. It is either painful, disconnected idling, or euphoric, unsustainable overdrive.
Which makes existing in a standard 9-to-5 feel like a form of psychological torture. But this brings us to the absolute climax of this deep dive, and this is why I find the source material so inspiring.
It takes a turn here.
It really does. Because this author doesn't just lay out the trauma. They don't just complain about the unfairness of the corporate world, throw their hands up, and surrender to the misery. They do something incredibly proactive, deeply analytical, and, frankly, brilliant.
They build a system.
They invent a functional framework. They sit down and write their own literal instruction manual for how to manage their brain.
This is the blueprint for coexistence. The author outlines a highly specific, 6-step hunting protocol. It is a masterclass in unorthodox management. This is the manual for how you successfully handle the Ferrari.
We are going to spend a significant amount of time breaking down all 6 rules of this manual, because if you are a manager or if you are neurodivergent yourself, this is pure gold.
It's extremely actionable.
Let's start with the first 2 rules, which establish the physical parameters of the working relationship. Rule 1, I need an endlessly stretching rubber-like collar. And rule 2, hold the rubber collar in one hand and just focus on sending me out to hunt.
The imagery the author chooses here is wild, but it is incredibly precise. An endless rubber collar.
Yeah, what does that mean in practice?
They are telling their manager, in no uncertain terms, do not put a rigid, fixed-length leash on me. If you put a standard corporate leash on a brain that moves this fast, if you micromanage their steps, the brain will essentially snap its own neck, trying to run at its natural speed.
It requires elasticity. The manager's job completely changes. Their job is no longer to dictate the exact path the employee takes. Their job is simply to manage the tension of the tether.
Exactly.
It makes me think of the ancient art of falconry.
Falconry. Explain how you see that connecting.
Think about it. If you have a highly trained, incredibly powerful apex predator falcon, you do not micromanage its flight.
Right, you can't.
You don't hold it in your hands and tell it how to flap its wings or explain to it which thermal updraft it should catch. That would be absurd. The falcon is vastly superior to you in the domain of flight. What do? You hold the leather tether on your glove, you take off the hood, and you point the bird toward the prey. You let it hunt using its own unparalleled instincts.
That is a phenomenal parallel. Yeah. That is exactly the dynamic the author is demanding from their leadership.
Yeah.
They are telling their manager, do not tell me how to solve the problem. Your standard operating procedures are too slow for me anyway. Just point me at the problem, point me at the prey, and let me loose.
But the author is also deeply self-aware of the dangers of being let loose, which leads right into rules 3 and 4.
Right. They know their limits.
Rule 3, pull the rubber band back and return to the nest once before the deadline. And rule 4, check the results of the hunt.
This is where the elasticity of that rubber collar becomes crucial. The author knows their own machinery. They know they have a dangerous tendency to go too far, to get lost in the infinite predictive loops we discussed earlier, or to hyper-focus on a detail that isn't relevant to the business goal.
Because they don't have the brakes.
Because they lack internal stopping mechanisms, yes. They need an external force to reel them back in before time runs out.
They're literally providing the manager with the brake pedal. They are saying, I am fully aware that I do not have internal brakes, so I am installing an external emergency brake and I am giving you the lever.
I love that.
You let the falcon fly, but before the sun goes down, you tug the tether. You bring the bird back to the glove to see what it caught. They are outsourcing their executive function to the manager.
And what the author brings back from that hunt might be entirely unexpected. Which brings us to Rule 5. And it's vital to note that the author explicitly marks this rule with a tag that says, important.
Yeah, that stood out to me.
Rule 5 is, identify what can be realized based on the deliverables.
I read that rule 3 times because it represents a total fundamental paradigm shift in how business is usually conducted.
It really does. It flips standard management completely upside down.
How?
Well, traditional corporate management is strictly outcome first. A manager sits down and says, we need a bridge. It needs to look exactly like this blueprint. It needs to be built using these specific materials, and we need it by Tuesday. The outcome is fixed, and therefore the process to get there is heavily restricted.
But the author requires the exact opposite approach. They are operating in discovery mode, not execution mode.
Right.
They are telling the manager, let the Ferrari run off the map, let the falcon fly out of sight, wait and see what incredible unforeseen thing it brings back to the nest. And then only once you're holding the deliverable in your hands do you figure out how to use it. The deliverable dictates the outcome, not the other way around.
Let's play that out. The manager might have sent the author out to find a slightly more efficient way to build a bridge. But because the author's brain processes infinite variables, they come back with the schematic for a localized teleporter.
Huh, a teleporter.
Traditional, rigid management would look at the teleporter, get angry, and say, I asked for a bridge. You're off track. Discard this and build the bridge.
Which is exactly what happens in those terrible meetings. They throw away the teleporter because it wasn't on the agenda.
Exactly. Rule 5 demands that the manager have the vision and the flexibility to look at the teleporter and say, okay, this isn't a bridge, but this is infinitely more valuable. Let's pivot the strategy and figure out how to monetize this new technology.
It's about recognizing value, even if it wasn't what you asked for.
This is why the author marks it as the most crucial step. It demands that the organization adapts to the genius rather than forcing the genius to build a mediocre bridge.
It requires a massive amount of trust. And finally, we have Rule 6, which might be my favorite. Rule 6 states, if you want me to hunt for exactly what you expect, assign a neurotypical partner to accompany me and naturally bring me back to the focused path.
The level of self-awareness required to write Rule 6 is astounding. This isn't arrogance. It is pure, pragmatic self-assessment.
It blew my mind.
Yeah.
Because the author isn't demanding that the entire corporate world bend to their will 100% of the time.
No, they get it.
They aren't throwing a tantrum saying, I am a misunderstood genius and you must accept all my eccentricities. They understand the reality of business. They know that sometimes the company doesn't need a teleporter. Sometimes they really just need the standard, boring bridge built by Tuesday to satisfy a client.
They acknowledge the reality of the corporate environment, but critically, they also acknowledge their own neurological limitations in achieving that specific type of standardized linear reality.
Right. They're essentially saying, if you need a standard result, do not expect me to magically grow commuter car brakes and become a standard employee. It will fail. Instead, give me a translator. Give me a neurotypical guide.
A partner in crime, basically.
Yeah. They're asking for a colleague who speaks both the high-speed, non-linear language of the Ferrari and the pragmatic bullet point language of the boardroom. Someone who can sit in the passenger seat, look at the map, and gently nudge the steering wheel to keep the car on the track without slamming on those inadequate brakes and causing a crash.
That's a great visual.
They are asking for a human API, an interface between their neurodivergent brain and the rigid society they have to operate within.
It is a profound, mature compromise. It is an instruction manual for a truly symbiotic relationship. The neurodivergent mind provides the unmapped speed, the predictive power, and the unconventional problem solving.
And what does the partner provide?
The neurotypical partner or manager provides the structure, the tether, the external brakes, and the translation layer to the rest of the company. It's a perfect division of cognitive labor.
It is so beautifully pragmatic, and understanding this manual leads us to the ultimate trade-off, which the author describes in the final sections of the source text. This is their current, evolved strategy for surviving the corporate world moving forward.
They have completely stopped trying to mask the reality of their machinery. The days of pretending to be a commuter car are officially over.
Exactly. They state that recently their entire approach to the job hunt has changed. When they go into interviews now, they disclose everything up front.
Which is incredibly brave.
It is. They tell the interviewer about their ADHD and ASD diagnoses right away. They lay out exactly what their workplace weaknesses will be, the literal thinking, the need for the tether, the inability to do standard linear tasks. They essentially slide this instruction manual across the conference table before they even get the job.
Which, as a strategy, goes against every piece of standard career advice you will ever hear from a guidance counselor.
Oh, totally.
Conventional wisdom dictates that you hide your flaws, mask your neurodivergence, and wait until you have the leverage of a signed contract and passing your probationary period before you ask for accommodations.
But the author has reached an ultimate clarifying realization about what actually matters in a career. They state it perfectly clearly.
What is it?
The salary does not matter. The brand name, the prestige of the company, the title on the business card, none of it matters. The only thing that matters to their survival is being in the correct place. A place that reads the manual, understands the terms of engagement, looks at the Ferrari and says, yes, we accept this machine for exactly what it is.
Because if the environment isn't correct, if the managers don't know how to hold the tether, the salary is completely meaningless.
It's just not worth it.
The trauma of being humiliated in meeting rooms, the sheer exhaustion of the unbroken predictive loop, the chilling isolation of the dissociative state, no amount of money or prestige can compensate for enduring that daily reality. The cost to their soul is simply too high.
And to balance this demand, the author makes a powerful closing promise to the employers who do accept them. To the managers who are willing to bear the burden of reading the manual, managing the tether, and dealing with the unconventional communication.
The ROI, basically.
Yes, the return on investment. They promise, I will bring back views that only a Ferrari can see.
It is a bold, confident claim, but based on everything we've unpacked today, the processing speed, the pattern recognition, the ability to see outside the conventional box, it is entirely justified.
I completely agree.
The corporate world is so often obsessed with standardization. It wants reliable, interchangeable parts that never disrupt the assembly line. But in enforcing that rigid conformity, it squanders the immense world-changing value locked inside neurodivergent minds.
It's a tragedy, really.
Minds that can literally see around corners. Minds that process complex variables at lightning speed. Minds that are entirely unbound by the artificial limiting rules of how things have always been done.
It's a massive, tragic missed opportunity for true innovation. And it leaves you, our listener, with a deeply provocative thought to carry with you.
Right.
I want you to look around your own workplace today. Look at the people sitting quietly in your meetings. Look at your colleagues who maybe communicate a little differently. Hell, look at your own life and the way your own mind works.
We all have our own engines.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are you forcing a Ferrari to drive in bumper-to-bumper 10-mile-an-hour traffic? Are you constantly complaining about its jerky brakes, its loud engine, its inability to parallel park like a standard boring sedan? Or are you willing to read the instruction manual, build a longer tether, and find a track where that mind can actually open up the throttle and show you scenery you never even knew existed?